very forward and collaborative with your ideas in order to develop the best strategy and our shared approach for our clean water advocacy goals. So all of you here are integral in achieving our victories across the watershed, and we look forward to partnering with you beyond this call and the forum, of course. So these interactive policy sessions will actually be occurring for each basin state. Thanks to New Jersey for being the guinea pig and being the first in our program for this event this year. We certainly invite folks to participate in these other state strategy calls as applicable to your organization's scope of work. So details and times for those sessions can be found on Cdrw.com, which Sandra promoted lovely. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ed and Rebecca to get us started. So take it away, folks.
Great. Well, thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Sandra, and everyone else this morning for joining us. I'm Ed Potasnik. I'm Executive Director of the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, and we serve as the state lead for the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed, which really is a supportive role. Many of you know Rebecca, who is really the point person and, playing that leadership role, has monthly calls that are, generative topics that you all care about, highlighting members and discussing important issues as they relate to New Jersey in the Delaware River watershed. I think back to, was it 3 years ago or something, as we got started putting together sort of a list of priorities that we might work on for policy, both at the state and federal level. And now I look forward to what we've been doing, which has been, convening and thinking a little bit more strategically and long-term about how we can work together on shared mutual interests and priorities that'll help protect and restore the basin and other interests for individual organizations so we can work on collectively together through the coalition. And, today we're going to get a chance to dig in a little bit deeper on a particular issue. And that's exciting. And it's going to really depend on all of us to put our best thinking caps on about how we can really affect the kind of change that we want to see in New Jersey. And I'm not surprised we're going first this morning of the states, sort of inspire other states in the Delaware River area, the basin, to do some really cool stuff. We have a unique opportunity with a pro-conservation governor and a legislature that leans towards environmental support. So that it's exciting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, who will pick up the rest of the agenda. I just really want to thank everyone and particularly have a ton of appreciation and really admire the work that Rebecca's done for the coalition on behalf of New Jersey LCV in our role as state lead.
Thanks, Ed. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Rebecca Hilbert. I've been with the League for almost a year and a half now, and it's been really exciting. And I think one of the most interesting things that I do is my work with Cdrw. For those of you who don't know, I'm actually really excited to see a lot of new faces. We have a call every month where we talk about our priorities. We give updates about what's going on. We strategize a little bit. So that's why we're excited about today's call, because instead of updates, we really want to focus more on diving deep on a strategic level. And one of the ways we seek to do that is by taking one of our priorities. And if you're not familiar with them, I put them in the chat. So recently we sent out a poll to our listserv and we had people vote on what priorities we want to dig a little deeper into. And I'm really pleased to announce that the one chosen is promoting stormwater programs and best practices to address flooding, reduce polluted runoff, and modernize infrastructure. And this is really interesting because this is kind of a topic that we don't talk about too often. Naturally, some of the priorities get a little bit more attention than others, depending on what's going on in the legislature, what's going on in the climate. For example, we talk a lot about plastics, and super exciting news that that bill is moving this week. So here we're just going to take some time to talk about a different priority and explore that. And we've come up with an agenda where it's more of a guiding document. I definitely don't want to be the one talking so much on this call. I want to be asking the group questions. And oh, good point, Stacy. If no one is, if you're not in the listserv, just drop your name in the chat and we'll make sure that you get all these events and call invitations so you can be with them in the future. Because we'd love to see more people join. We like to get a wide range of opinions and different perspectives. So we're just going to dive right in. And I think we have a small enough group that you can just unmute yourself if you have a comment. If it looks like it's going to get a little convoluted, then we'll just raise hands. So, okay. Just a reminder, we're going to be talking about stormwater. And I think the first thing we want to talk about with this priority is, what does a victory look like? So this is kind of a situation we have with a lot of the agenda items. For plastics, a victory is passing a plastic bag bill legislation. But for stormwater, I feel like that's going to be an ongoing, you know, campaign. And we need to figure out, like, what are our victories? What are our checkpoints? So I'm going to open up to the floor. What does a victory look like for promoting stormwater programs, best practices, flooding, and reducing pollution runoff, and modernizing infrastructure? And I'll be taking all the notes, so feel free to just unmute yourself and give your thoughts.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's Jen. I'm still pulling it together here. Oh, hair.
Morning, Jen. You look good. Don't worry.
So we had a couple stormwater victories already. We're not done yet, but we've had quite a few. A big one was it last year already? This year's a little weird. The stormwater utilities bill. So authorizing the municipalities, counties, et cetera, to be able to adopt a stormwater utility. So that is huge. Obviously, next step is now getting somebody to do it and then promoting the success around that. One of the other stormwater successes that just popped right to my mind comes off of a DEP meeting I had last week or the week before, where they are finally looking to use, because we finally have data that projects the impacts of stormwater and precipitation from climate change. And so they're looking to use modeled data as really the way to go in the next set of stormwater rules. So that's really exciting, because what we do today, we're hoping will be around in 30 years, especially if you're talking about hospitals and police stations and, you know, infrastructure that we build for the long haul. So knowing what kind of, to the best that we can know, how climate change is affecting stormwater, flooding, and precipitation, and using that data in our rules is really important. So I think those are big wins. There's lots and lots of other stuff, and I don't want to take up the whole session, but there's lots more to do.
Well, let me ask that question. Where do you see going forward as like the biggest thing to do on the to-do list?
I think it's both stormwater utilities and getting that data in place, because I think that addresses both fixing the problems that we've created from poor planning, which is the stormwater utilities part. Poor planning, and really planning based on data without climate change in mind. Mm-hmm. Partially because we, as a society, ignored it, and partially because we just didn't have good modeling data. And then getting that modeling data into the regulations at the state and local level, so that we can prepare for what we know is happening and will happen. It kind of works both sides of the timeline.
Yeah, Jen, this is Eileen. Do they have base? How you doing? Your hair looks great.
Oh, thank you.
Do you know, does DEP have baseline data? Do they have current baseline data, so that as they move forward with improvements, there'll be something to compare it to? Because that's...
Oh, we have an enormous amount of baseline data. Yeah, in terms of precipitation volume, flooding, 5-year, 10-year, 100-year storms. There's a ton of data. The really exciting data that has come in terms of modeling is from New York, because they've been on it for a few years. And in the previous gubernatorial administration, they got to a weird place where they weren't even allowed to talk about climate change. And New York did some studies that included, don't quote me on this, but I want to say it was 14 different monitoring locations in New Jersey for different flood stages based on different precipitation volumes. And so using that data and translating it for the rest of New Jersey is what the DEP is looking to do right now. The developers are freaking the freak out, just to put it plainly, and pretty much saying that, well, we're not going to know if this data is right until we get to 2050. And the answer is, yeah, you're right. But as a society and as a government that's looking to protect the environment and people, we can't wait to see if we were right. And the worst case scenario is that we were a bit precautious. However, we know that every time we do modeling on climate change, the science is underestimating the impacts. So chances are we're not being overly precautious.
Jen, I always love we don't know it's a bullet until we get hit by the bullet, so we should wait till we get hit by the bullet.
Yeah.
Going off with Jen, I mean, it is going to be huge to use the predictive modeling to figure out what future storms will be and design for those. I think that will be huge. I want to sort of put out there sort of the ultimate goal, the ultimate endpoint of success for stormwater is, I don't want to say actually seeing water quality meet standards, but at least seeing the trends going in that direction. You know, year after year after year, the 303D list reports, the integrated water quality monitoring reports say water quality, is sort of going to mediocre. So our extremely poor waters are improving, and that's probably because of, improving wastewater treatment plants and stop dumping in there. But our highest level waters are degrading, mostly because of land use decisions. So we could start to at least see a trend because of our stormwater management improving, of seeing those waters improve. I think that will be sort of the ultimate pie in the sky success. Everything else is probably a waypoint and a stepping stone towards that.
Are there species that could be indicative of water quality improvements, Mike, besides just monitoring for chemicals or contaminants? Are there species that we're seeing in decline that if they were doing better, that would be a sign of improvement?
Now you ask me science. I mean, I know, one of the uses, one of the standards for waterways is aquatic life. And there is a whole suite of macroinvertebrates that you see when you have degraded water quality versus good water quality, so that there's an indication there. There's a whole slew of threatened and endangered species that use the wetlands and riparian zones along waterways. But I think probably the best biological indicator is the macroinvertebrates, which are incorporated into that water monitoring assessment report every 2 years.
The macros have a longer lag time of coming back than the chemical data. So when you see the straight up water quality data starting to improve over, a couple year span, that usually reacts a little more quickly, my understanding is, than the biology, just because, critters take a little bit more time to settle back in and find the good water quality.
Yeah, and I just want to address 2 comments, making sure that we see those. Somebody said less HABs, which of course I think would be a great victory for stormwater management, and we definitely want to see that. And then Deanie put monitoring non-point pollution sources, which I think is also a great tactic. Going to make sure. I just want everyone to know your comments are being recorded, so you can throw them in there as well.
Hi, this is Carol Collier with the Academy, and a couple of things. One, we have been monitoring through the Delaware River Watershed Initiative. There are 500 monitoring stations working with the clusters. And I know Alan Hunt is here and doing a lot on the Muskegon. And Jen is absolutely right that macroinvertebrates take a while. We found that algae has a quicker response time than some of the other critters. But we're also working on some modeling tools with Rutgers to get a better assessment of how effective a certain stormwater BMP will be on the receiving stream. A lot of times folks can calculate, well, it'll capture, such volume of water in that watershed and will reduce phosphorus by X pounds. But what does that really mean for the receiving stream? Is it 3% or 50%? So we're working on that and definitely share it when we get it together.
So someone, Rebecca, asked in the chat if folks could introduce themselves. So the first person we heard from was Jen Coffey, who's the executive director of ANJAC. And then I asked the follow-up question of Ed Patasic with New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. Then Eileen Murphy with New Jersey Audubon asked the follow-up question to Jen, followed by Mike Pizarro at the Watershed Institute and Carol Collier from the Academy of Natural Sciences.
Okay, that was impressive.
Yeah, that was good, Ed. Great point. Yeah, I mean, a lot of us haven't met before, or maybe we've met on the phone, haven't seen faces. So please introduce yourself as you talk. So this is really great. And I think one of the things we want to talk about to achieve these victories or to follow up on these victories that already happened is we want to think about, are these policies feasible to achieve this year, this legislative session, and how do we see COVID-19 affecting these goals? If you're working on these stormwater issues, how has COVID already affected your work on these goals? So I think we're going to transition a bit to talking about that.
Oy vey, because municipalities and counties are not meeting and for months would not understandably talk about anything that wasn't in the very immediate emergency sense. And so any beginnings of conversations we were having with them about stormwater utilities quickly got shelved. So, you know, that we're going to be working on prying that off the, you know, the dusty bookshelf at this point and trying to put that right in front of them. Meanwhile, with stormwater, municipalities are under an obligation to adopt an ordinance that's effective as of March 2nd of the new year that embraces the new stormwater rules that DEP adopted. So those rules don't have all the fancy climate change data in it, but we're trying to nudge municipalities to include some more progressive provisions, but working to make sure that municipalities adopt those ordinances, because while there are a lot of them who will embrace it, there are still quite a few who are chanting the unfunded mandate, we don't have to do this, you know, mantra. And so that's like, I think for ANJAC, our immediate focus. And we're working with the Watershed Institute and others to make sure that those ordinances are adopted and in effect by March 2nd. And then I think in tandem with that, also talking with entities that we were talking to before pandemic about utilities and trying to get that ball rolling again.
Hi, this is Steve Jandoli from the American Littoral Society. And I think one of the things that relates to stormwater utilities is approaching stormwater management on a regional basis with local governments. It's much more effective for them to work in that manner because stormwater is a regional issue throughout watersheds. And for individual municipalities to adopt utilities, which is going to be a major goal in and of itself, but it'll be an easier lift if they work in concert with other municipalities in a watershed. And also, you know, maybe using existing entities like the Hackensack Meadowlands Commission or other regional entities that are working on that basis, the Highlands Commission, the Highlands Commission, to council to get some stormwater utilities in place, since they're already working and structured on a regional basis. The other thing, picking up on what Stephanie said about combined sewer overflows, is a major goal of stormwater management, addressing that issue, because in many communities, you know, getting to address the water quality issue is without addressing the CSOs is, you know, something has to be done. So.
And I'm just curious, how are people responding when you're talking to a local official and they say the last thing I want to do right now in, you know, COVID is impose a quote tax on my residents? How do we go about fighting that messaging?
Well, I think part of it is to make local officials understand the real cost of stormwater, that they are in fact, residents are subsidizing these stormwater improvements. So there's a way to, share that cost of stormwater more fairly and equitably. That should be at least, looked at. But yeah, that is going to be a tough one. I've talked to people in my town, and it's like, I'm talking about holding crucifixions on Sunday. They just don't want to hear it, especially at this time. But I think eventually, like so many other issues in our business, will come around. But
Yes, Steve, I think that's a really good point. And I think one of the things, I guess there's two things, and one of the towns we're working with really wants to get a handle of where their issues are. They're interested in stormwater utilities, but they want to know where their issues are. They want to know where there's flooding, where their stormwater management is failing, where, water quality issues are. And I think getting towns to sort of do that sort of leads you into the, okay, you have all of these problems. You've never really realized they're there, or you sort of knew they were there, but never really gave it a comprehensive look. Stormwater utilities is an equitable way to address those. And a lot of our communities have a lot of either governmental space that isn't paying property taxes, or nonprofit space, or so those towns that have a significant stormwater problem, but yet their tax base doesn't really represent that problem. There's another way of saying, listen, then everyone who's not already paying can now chip in and help solve that problem, and can, contribute to their pollution loading.
Okay. Great. So I think one of the things we definitely want to do during this strategy session is just identify who's on our team and the strengths of our team members. So we all have our own organizations and our own chapters, and we just want to talk about who for this priority can actually claim that this stormwater management, it's a large part of the work that you do, because we want to make sure that we're going to the right members for the right information, for the right tactics. So if you could either, raise your hand, you could put your name in the chat. If your organization is doing a majority of this work, just let us know.
Which piece of the stormwater? Because I know there's a working group on the rules and related to implementation, which Mike is involved with, and folks from NRDC, and I know Jen filters in and out of that. So that'd be ANJAC, the Watershed Institute, NRDC, and Mike, you're convening those over at the Watershed. Well, when we were in person, right?
Yeah.
So that's how what I saw. And then on stormwater utilities, there's the Flood Defense Coalition, which New Jersey LCV is sort of shepherding, but there's a whole lot of membership. I see a lot of people working on this issue on the call this morning. And I saw this other bucket, which was like around outcome. So the idea being, there's as Jen put it, the legacy problem of development, which stormwater utilities seems to be the best or highest priority from what we're hearing for folks to address that. And then there's the going forward as we redevelop or do new development. These rules are really important, and having the data component. So those are the sort of two things. And then there's this other part that I heard around outcomes. So reducing HABs and increasing water quality, right? Sort of like, though, if we do stormwater utilities right and we do the rules right, and then we're going to have these positive outcomes. Did I miss anything in those three buckets? Is there like, and I would put sort of CSOs in maybe with utilities, or it could stand on its own, because they really are a complicated, and they affect a lot of people, and highly negatively impacting the environment too, CSOs.
With the rules, Ed, I would just also add in ordinances, because the DEP rules are most often implemented through ordinances.
Mm-hmm.
Not always, but mostly.
So rules and on ordinances. So is there anything else that was brought up that sort of fits outside the buckets? If we had 4, like CSO, stormwater utility rules, and then this sort of, where does it lead to outcomes?
Hey, Ed.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Richard Lawton with the New Jersey Sustainable Existence Council. I was just thinking about just the funding, thinking long-term about, how are all these, the protection, increased protection needs, how are they funded, and also the investment in green stormwater infrastructure and green infrastructure in general. Thinking about, the stormwater utilities, a way of locally, funding those initiatives. But, as we get more data about the impact of climate change, how do we think larger on a regional basis about, getting the necessary investment and funding for all the changes we need? Is there a link possibly to RGGI, to TCI, or is there something like that would be equivalent, for water infrastructure?
Mm-hmm.
Since RGGI and TCI are basically ways of internalizing the external cost of carbon pollution and climate change, that if we can identify and quantify the impact on our water infrastructure, could they be sources of funding for water infrastructure as well, versus just staying in the buckets of transportation and energy? So I just want to raise that as maybe more of a long-term issue, because all these things will require funding and investment. And how do we do that? And at what scale? Local, regional, or state?
I think you're right. Most of us have bought into stormwater utilities as the funding mechanism, but it is not the only one. There are maybe some others out there. So I just kind of wanted to put a pin, as a finer point on that, sort of like, I know some folks are already working in those spaces. That was sort of Rebecca's question. Is there anyone that's working on funding or sort of I mean, Carol mentioned tracking outcomes, the data monitoring across the watersheds, 520, I think she said, different sites. So I would say that that's probably the most comprehensive look at some of those pieces. I imagine the DP is tracking the hazardous algal blooms, but does any other nonprofit really track that? I know Princeton Hydro's on the call, and they are often involved in these situations, sometimes in the testing itself by contract, or in the, I would say probably dealing with the cause and symptoms if there's funding available. Am I missing anyone else that's kind of got stormwater at the top of their radar as an organization?
And I've recorded everyone who put their name in the chat.
Awesome.
This is Dana from Princeton Hydro. I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but NIFWIF, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, they do fund a lot of green infrastructure related projects, and they're very solid on tracking of metrics, and they've got their regional plans out. So I'd add that to the list. And then I think something maybe we haven't talked about is there's emerging companies, excuse me, finance companies within the ecosystem restoration field, specifically around green infrastructure. And they're essentially like offering, I guess, 0% loans or other types of finance mechanisms for municipalities or government agencies and nonprofits. In some cases, they may help with like a loan to do a match for a grant. It's kind of an emerging field. I don't really know that much about it, but I do know there's a lot of companies out there. A lot of them are like down in DC area. But I think it's something that we're starting to have conversations with to try to connect those places with our clients to try to get more projects moving in the green infrastructure, stormwater mitigation realm.
Dana brought up a great transition point. We talked a lot about the inside players, I like to call them, Cdrw members, people we work with closely. But we need to talk about who, not on this call, who are the outside players that need to get involved? Who do we need to talk to make sure these policies and ordinances and funding mechanisms happen?
So I think there's twofold. One, obviously, is to get the municipalities, because they are on the front line of implementing the new regulations. They're on the front line of reviewing development, getting them to really buy into the new rules, the climate change rules that are coming out, and really implement true stormwater management versus lip service, where a lot of towns are doing. I think that will be huge. And I think the engineers and architects that are designing these stormwater management systems, really getting them to buy into the paradigm shift. You know, a lot of them are looking at, okay, I got to do green infrastructure, dry well, dry well, dry well, and then, you know, maybe another dry well, without actually, you know, looking at it holistically. Getting those two groups to sort of buy into these changes, I think will be key.
Municipalities, engineers, architects, great point.
You know, one way to do that, to engage them, do they have annual conferences? Like we have this annual forum for organizations who want to learn more. I imagine that there are engineering conferences, that there are conferences for industry who work on this. We could present at those conferences, and that
So,
I have found that to be a really good way to engage with the community that we think should be aware and doing more in this. And I find them to be very receptive, you know, when you approach them like that. And then there's networking opportunities, or there used to be back in the day when we did this in person.
so Eileen, too, I mean, Sustainable Jersey is doing a seminar on the rules at the League of Municipalities in November, I think it is. Also, the Watershed Institute is running a green infrastructure certification course to really get those engineers, the landscape architects, to understand these concepts and install them right. I think we do start doing them wrong, we're really going to have to dig out from under the hole. But yeah.
We also have our environmental congress, and we've been drawing more planning board members and local officials to that. I think there's been a traditional problem of the engineers, and I don't want to lump them all in a category, but the old school way of engineering is not friendly to this newfangled engineering and stormwater management for climate change and water quality. The old school thought is get the water away. But now we've discovered there is no away. It's somebody else's community, it's somebody's basement, it's somebody's backyard. And so it's a new generation of thinking. And it's a tandem of one, knowing how to do it. And I think there are enough people out there who do know how to do it now. And also building the political pressure so that community members realize these floods that are happening in their basements, their roads, their businesses can be better managed. Now, I'm not talking about the big, you know, storms, the Irenes, the Sandys, the Floyds, but I'm talking about the 210, you know, 20-year storms that are nuisance storms that drive engineers crazy. They could be much, much, much better managed. And so promoting that to the public so that they are then an informed constituency to pressure their local officials. And once we get a few of these adopted that go progressive, if you will, so beyond the minimum requirements, we've got to promote the heck out of them and how great of a story that they are, so that others say, oh, we want to do that too. It's exactly what happened, not to talk about plastics, but it's what happened with plastics. There was so much resistance, and then all of a sudden people realized, oh, we can actually make a difference on this, and it snowballed.
Great points there, Jen. And I think we want to get, since this is a strategy session, we want to get a little bit even more into the details here. So does anybody have any relationships with outside partners that they particularly want to highlight? Are there any further upcoming events or meeting schedules that you think would be a good space to talk about this? Because we want to start to plan out, okay, here, and Jack has this connection here. And we just want to figure out, like, map it out a little bit. So just throw them out there. Is there a relationship you want to highlight? An event coming up you think would be great to present? And if you have any thoughts that you can't think of right now, I'll leave my email in the chat and you can send it to me again after that.
Good morning. My name is Nam Su Suk with the Delaware River Basin Commission. Not the meetings, but a little bit different perspective on stormwater side. The DRBC developed a TMDL, total maximum daily loads for PCBs for Delaware River estuary in early 2000 and has been implemented mainly for the point source discharges, meaning traditional wastewater treatment plant side. So we achieved over 70% PCB load reductions, and Commission and Basin states currently working on called Stage 2 PCB TMDLs. In there, we try to develop some implementation strategy for MS4s, municipal separate stormwaters, and CSOs, and so forth. So this group may be a good venue to discuss that more pollutant-specific controls. That's the one aspect. Another topic is the CSOs and recreation use. CSOs are considered as a primary source for the bacteria into the estuary, and portion of the estuary is not currently set as a primary contact use yet. So that's Commission is started doing some monitoring first, but we need much more data, how much bacteria comes from CSOs or even just a storm sewer itself. We need to source tracking or source identification first before implementing specific controls. So that's the second part. Third one can be the relate to the salt or TDS. During the road sorting, we see increase of TDS, total dissolved solid, or chloride increase, even in the non-tidal spatial protection waters. It's not high enough, but trend-wise, it is increasing. So, and we preliminary assumption is road salt during winter time is culprit for that. So more research and data needed to how much contribution comes from road salt into the storm drain and into the receiving water. I thought I had one more. Another topic, Commission currently working on dissolved oxygen to increase dissolved oxygen in the estuary. Currently stormwater or separate stormwater is not a big source of nutrients yet, but still the data itself, water quality side, the data is quite lack of. Even Academy of Natural Sciences, Carol mentioned that lots of data being collected, but water quality side, data collection, as a water quality manager, I think that's critical. Not only the quantity side, quality side of data is critical to have. So that's my input to this group.
Hey, Namsu, I have a follow-up question for you. Years ago, USGS did a study on road salts, and that not only did they increase the total dissolved solids, but that they helped to mobilize any metals that were in the soil and carried them to the water column as well. So not only did they see the increase in TDS, they saw increases in lead and other metals. Have you seen that at all in your monitoring?
Well, I cannot say definitely, but our data is sparse. I do not believe salinity or chloride increase itself will increase the leaching out lead, not necessarily, but
yeah, they had. That's why it was a little bit surprising. It could just be that it was carried in the water, in the runoff, in addition to the salts being run off. They concluded that it helped to mobilize it, but I don't know if it was conclusive.
It is likely if pH changes, then it will increase the reachability. Reaching out, yeah. So, so pH will be more related to that topic.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great.
Rebecca, this is Donna from the Legal Foundation. I just have a question I want to ask to this group in general. So all of you have so many different connections to the municipalities. Are any of you aware of any municipality that might be close to adopting the stormwater utility? Okay, I was just wondering.
Yes, sorry, I was on a lag there. I got lost on my computer. I don't know that I want to say who it is in a public forum because they're not quite there yet, but we have been having conversations with a municipality who's getting ready to look at launching a feasibility study. And Newark has been very, very public and been working on it for a couple of years. I'm not exactly sure where they are at the moment, but there is someone in South Jersey as well who is looking at it.
So I'm just going to look at the clock real quick. We have 17 minutes to go. We've heard from a number of folks. I just want to see if there are other people who haven't participated yet. We want to make sure there, 50 something people on the call. Everyone gets a chance to participate. So if you have an opportunity to, jump in and share your ideas, we'd really love to hear from you as well. I know there's a few more things we want to try to look ahead to make sure we talk about. Maybe we were overly ambitious in our agenda and we can continue this on a call, but we do have great attendance today. And it's really a good treasure trove of knowledge as well. So I just want to remind folks to jump in and make sure everyone can be heard.
Hi, this is Andrew Tabis with New Jersey Future. I'm curious what people have seen at the municipality level. Are municipalities interested in going above and beyond the stormwater ordinance requirements, or are they kind of like not following the Watershed Institute and just more doing like the bare bones requirements? Like what have people seen?
I think mostly, and Mike, you could probably know more because you follow a lot within a very progressive area that likes to do more than the base, but mostly people just follow the rules. And, I think my time on the different planning board, et cetera, folks are always looking to get around the rules if they can, and some of the exceptions. Those are the ones at least that come before, the public bodies. So there's not too many that really want to exceed the standards. I know Princeton had one of the strongest. I live in Franklin in Somerset County, one of the strongest in the state, but there are not many like that.
I would say there's more than a handful or two, and yeah. I would just push back.
Out of 560.
Yeah, there's Princeton, there's Cranford, there's Hightstown, there's Morris Township. Mike has a spreadsheet of it. The importance of getting a few municipalities to be more progressive is that we can then take that to the DEP and the stakeholder meetings and say, no, look, you actually can do it, when developers say this can't be done. So it's a back and forth.
That's great, thanks.
Great, so I think one thing we definitely want to address while there's time is how Cdrw can help advance everyone's work and goals. Because I want to make it clear that, Cdrw, we're not me, Kelly, Sandra, we're not trying to be the total leaders on every single priority. That's just not feasible, and it's not something we want to do. We want to better help everyone, a part of our coalition, advance the work that they're doing to forward our priorities. So what role can our coalition support you in this particular goal?
I will also add to that if there's any resource needs that would be helpful in advancing our goals, is there materials, meetings, et cetera, how can we be a resource and help?
Hey everybody, this is Techie James from National Audubon Society. I have a question on if you've been able to connect environmental injustice or red line related issues with communities that are being pushed towards the margins, and perhaps the effect of flooding as it deals with the issues of poor stormwater management.
I mean, I think the answer is absolutely. We have at New Jersey LCV and the Flood Defense Coalition, we had something called Stormwater Stories. And what we did is we had people share local experiences with stormwater. And they were quite harrowing in communities of color about, where the combined sewers are when the rain came, how they had to walk through sewage to get to and from their home, whether it was to school or work. And clearly there has been inadequate steps taken to address those problems. And it's really affecting people's health. It's affecting their ability to work, and it's costing lots of money to do the remediation work if it even happens. So I think that is a really important issue. In our urban areas, they tend to be more in the combined sewer communities, but not always. So when the rain comes, it's even worse because it mixes with sewage. So it's not just a flood, it's sewer water flooding your basement or your windows or your door or your car or your every business. It's really, really bad.
Yeah, and to expand on that, Taiki, one of the priorities of the coalition is to engage these communities even more in the upcoming years, so that they can identify themselves what their most important issues are. So that's a real priority upcoming for the coalition. So any ideas you have or anyone else to better engage these communities, we welcome.
My question was about any data or resources that describe, I think, and you two did a really great job at explaining it, but I'm really familiar with it already because of Philly and all those other things. But I was just trying to see if there's research and something I can present to somebody.
Yeah, Rutgers has as far as a resource, absolutely. Rutgers has a flood mapping tool, which we can share a link to, which takes you to if there was a ½ inch of flooding, what areas would be underwater? If there was 3 inches, what would it be, etc. And, I think I don't know that it overlays with any census data particularly, but it might because it's a GIS file. And that's as much as I know as a chemist, is to say those words, but I don't actually know anything about mapping.
Not a problem. Well, here's an idea. We can work with, and I've been trying to do this with some trail conservation folks in PA, but we can work better with the GIS community in applying some of that social justice lens to our data sets. They can overlay a map of the flood. They can now overlay, just public data. And I really believe in finding GIS firms. And I know that there's one in New Jersey that just I can't think of it, but basically it's training people to have these skills to answer some of these questions so that we can apply our understanding to somebody already made the floodplain data, but they didn't connect it to how it disproportionately affects people. Even though that we know that it does, let's get that on paper. And as an idea, I think working with folks in the GIS community, or even building GIS within the coalition or within specific organizations, may be a really good way to see that this work gets done and it gets resourced, shared within the coalition.
Yeah, I love that idea. I saw that in the New York Times they had a full page on the red line areas and currently now, and the visuals are even better than the words in the article. So that'd be great. And I know, Kelly, you're like a GIS whiz too. So we're definitely gonna take you up on that. I also think what I've been seeing in the chat a lot of the question you had, Rebecca, was, what kind of tools or what ways can folks, things that people need. So I think connecting these dots is important. I would definitely say the monthly meetings are helpful, but are there any topics in particular that folks want to talk more about or learn more about? Is having a panel or an expert come in or something like that helpful?
Somebody brought up a great idea of maybe having a CDRW hosted stormwater webinar series and they could each have different topics, different guest speakers. We could poll, we love polls here. We could poll again for what topics are you interested in and try to connect those topics to the speakers. Any thoughts on this kind of idea?
So this is Alan Hunt from the Muskegon Watershed Association. There were two things I want to suggest. One was when Ed was grouping things, we kind of got into 4 different buckets of stormwater work. One thing that I'm concerned about that wasn't in that group was around highways and like state DOT managed US highways, state highways, interstates. We had a soap spill off of one of the interstates and it killed, basically sterilized a native brook trout stream. And there are control technologies used in other states on where you can retrofit storm drains so that any of this stuff that's lighter than water floats and you can capture it. And we don't have the bandwidth really to try to figure out DOT, figure out the permitting, figure out demonstration technologies and pilot opportunities. That would be something that seems like a gap. The other was in the chat, there's also road salt. And, it seems like that there's, higher conductivity in the water, like Eileen had mentioned. And in some places where we get reports of wells that have enough saltiness to them that they're like ocean water, even though they're a freshwater well. So if there's opportunities to share like outreach methods to the DPWs or workshops or best practices around that, we'd be very interested. We have good municipal relationships, but we don't know what to tell them about road salt. So we're very interested in that because at least in our part of the state, a lot of our impervious cover comes from roadways.
Great point, Alan. Okay, so we have 6 minutes left. So I think I just kind of want to, I had so much more I wanted to talk about, but everyone has been so engaged and active and it's great. And I think I kind of just want to see how people feel about going over each priority kind of in this fine-tooth manner. What did we think about it? Was it helpful? Do we want to do this again on future meetings? What we could do is tackle each priority one by one per monthly call until we run out of priorities, and then they'll all be solved, of course. But at least we'll have a better strategy and plan for each priority, because some feedback we get often is we talk about what we want to work on a lot, but we don't really talk about how we're going to do it and how we're currently doing it. So what did people feel about this strategy session? Is it something we want to do again? Do we hate it?
I think it was great. I don't usually get to join the monthly calls, but I thought this was very useful.
Okay. And I think one thing that we definitely want to talk about in the future is how we approach these priorities. I know, I don't want to say it's kind of a free-for-all, but we did talk about which organizations tend to focus on stormwater. So we want to figure out, how do we want to split up these priorities? Do we want to do teams? Do we want to do a tiered approach? And I think this is a conversation for another meeting, definitely not with 4 minutes left in the call, but it's definitely something we want to talk about moving forward. And if anyone has any thoughts in the meantime of how we should approach our work, again, I'll put my email in the chat and you can always reach out to me or Kelly or Sandra. And I think I'll just leave it for any additional thoughts. Anyone who hasn't had the chance to talk yet, feel free to get any ideas out on any part of the agenda that you might have not been able to speak up at the time. Any questions?
I'll add really quick before other folks jump in too, is that we can continue this conversation on our monthly calls. It's an ongoing strategy session, either offline or with a larger group of folks, and we're happy to take your feedback and input and incorporate them into the coalition's priorities and tactics and strategies and such. So definitely thank you all for your time today, and this was wonderful and great. I'm happy to, continue this moving forward, but now we can open it up.
So this is Alan Hunt from the Muskegon Watershed Association. I think something for working on strategy, especially with a group of this size, it's good to have kind of like a clear question or direction to ask. Like, are you getting input? Are you getting feedback about a certain direction? Are you trying to get information out? it's a little different when you have as many folks here as versus, let's say, the people who are directly working on stormwater, where they might have a session more around, here's the actions we're going to take, here's how we're going to reach the legislature and whatnot. So I think my feedback would be trying to modulate the request and frame the meeting based upon, you know, who the group is and what you expect the outcome of the meeting to be. There's obviously a pretty large group here, and we have folks at all different levels of stormwater knowledge and capability and expertise.
That's a great point, Alan. And I think I'm just going to remind everyone that we really encourage everyone to sign up for the listserv, to sign up for these monthly calls. I think the more participants we have, the better. Even if you're from the same organization as someone else, sometimes we have one person from one organization and 4 from the same. And I think it works out either way. And we definitely want to see more of a representation. And if there's anyone you think maybe should be invited to the coalition to work on this kind of stuff, we're willing to take suggestions as well. We just want to make sure you know that we're a resource for you and your organizations, and just feel free to reach out to us at any point. And this was such a great session, and I really appreciate everybody coming. And I think we can just leave it off if no one else has anything to add. I know we have like 5 more sessions today, so everyone make sure you take a break, get up and stretch, walk around. And it was really great seeing everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
You too.